the early days, they used to use grade A cotton and Irish linen. And in the really early days, they used to actually shrink the cotton with water. So they would cover something, cover a component, they would spray water, the cotton would shrink. If you weren't happy enough with how tight it was, spray more water, it would continue shrinking. Once you were done, then you just kept the process going. A little later on, they started using nitrate dope. One of the bad things about nitrate dope is that it's highly flammable, it burned like crazy. Okay, then they started using butyrate dope. Now they couldn't get rid of nitrate completely, and the reason was butyrate wouldn't stick to their fabric. So they would still use nitrate, but they minimized the coatings by a lot. So they brush on some nitrate, maybe sprayed a few coats, and then they went to butyrate, which works great. Nowadays, we're still using nitrate and butyrate dope for some of the systems, okay? Now I try to explain the difference in between the systems. New technology came around and we started changing from using grade A cotton or Irish linen, and we now use polyester. There is a number of different systems that are out on the market, and I'm pretty sure they all use polyester. So when you think about these different systems, Seagonite's a known system, and Polyfiber, which we're going to focus on in this class, it's an entire different system. But guess what? The fabrics themselves are the same. They're polyester fabric. In fact, they actually come off the same roll. We just put a different stamp. The reason for that is all the coatings that go on the fabrics are completely different. Okay, so that's the difference between the systems. Later on, I want to say in the early 60s is when a guy by the name of Ray Stitz developed Polyfiber. The story says that Ray Stitz would buy a kit plane, put it together, cover it in the Seagonite system. After it was covered and flying, he'd sell it. So he's got this freshly built kit plane, and it's finished. He's got it sold. The customer's coming over to buy it this weekend. Everything's good. So Ray Stitz decides to do a little bit of welding next to the airplane. Spark shoots over to the airplane. It's covered with nitrate. Airplane burns to the ground. So now Ray Stitz is like, man, there's got to be a better way. So he and a couple friends get together and they come up with a Polyfiber system. All vinyl base. His main focus was something that didn't burn. Yes, if you put open flame to Polyfiber, it'll melt. You'll go through it, but as soon as you take the open flame away, it'll just self-extinguish. Versus something covered in nitrate, which is a Seagonite system, if you put flame to it, the entire piece of fabric is going to go away before it stops to burn. Okay. On a wing, we'll talk about a wing first, okay? On the leading edge of a wing, the minimum overlap is 2 inches. Okay? So on any wing panel you're covering is 2 inches on the leading edge. Anywhere else on that airplane, it's a 1 inch minimum. Only on the leading edges of a wing is 2 inches. Okay? Butt rib, tip bow, trailing edge, all the control surfaces, fuselage is 1 inch overlap. So the overlap has to be done over a structural part of the component you're covering. So you can't have an overlap in the middle of a wing. It has to be done either on the trailing edge, leading edge, tip bow, or the butt rib, okay? So it has to be done over structure. The overlap really starts as soon as fabric starts touching fabric on structure. So in this case, just what Austin's pointing out, fabric is gonna start riding on fabric on the bottom and right over to the top piece of fabric. You all follow? So you can start your measurement there. We know that on this tubing, if you start at the very bottom and wrap around right past the highest point, that gives you about 1 inch. And we'll go with that. If at home you're working with 1/8-inch tubing, you start at that bottom point, wrap around, you're gonna have to go a little past the highest point of the tubing, but just make sure you get your 1 inch and off you go. So you need to wait, you start here, so you're gonna get just that section, right? Let it do its work, and then,
I got it, okay.
and then as I come to the radius, then I'll start gathering more material. But if you keep pulling this
Yeah,
way,
then you're gonna have
yeah.
issues. Okay, I see it, yeah.
And the iron won't hurt the fabric, so you just let it.
You can let it just sit on it for a bit. All right, yeah, perfect.
And then that gives it a smooth.
Got it.
Panel that looks great, we're ready to move forward, okay? The next step is gonna be heat shrinking the fabric. Now remember those two temperatures we talked about was
250 and 350.
250 and 350. And this is why we do it in those two temperatures, okay? Let's take a cut wing for example. I would have a cut wing that is ready to shrink. I would crank my iron up to 250. I will start in the middle of the wing, shrink one bay, jump to the next bay, and go back and forth. What you're trying to do is spread out the shrinking load, okay? Because this stuff shrinks quite a bit. So you do top of the wing at 250, everything looks good, flip it around to the bottom of the wing at 250, and then you crank it up to 350. Okay, what you're looking for is warping, ribs moving. You don't want to break whatever component you're covering. Say you're in a hurry to make Sun and Fun next year, you got this wing ready to cover, and you're like, you know what, forget 250, you crank it to 350, and you start shrinking at the root end. Well, wherever you apply, fabric is going to draw into that iron of yours, so you're going to turn a cut wing into a Corsair wing. As long as things look normal, keep on going. You can shrink one. I've always done one side and then the next side. Another thing we do is when you start shrinking one bay, just have a pencil, which, by the way, if you mark on the fabric, you want to use pencil only. No Sharpie, no pen. The ink will just transfer through all the coatings. Okay? But yeah, do one bay, check it off with number 250 or a check, whatever, just to identify that you've already been there, because you want to shrink the entire component. runs on the inside of the fabric, not a problem. Okay, because that just means you're penetrating through the fabric, everything's good. If you have runs on the outside, then you would want to get rid of those, because if you run your hand through the surface and you can feel something, an imperfection, you're going to see that imperfection forever, okay? Runs on the inside, good. Too much poly brushes, if you're dripping to the other side and down onto your hanger floor, you might want to just take it back a little bit, okay? If you walk away and you come back and there's runs on the outside of the surface, it's already dry, not a big deal. Acetone or MK will cut right through that stuff, make it smooth again, and then you keep moving. So you would do every square inch of fabric on whatever component you're doing. As long as you understand that, for this purpose, we're only going to do one side of the panel. Good with that? So let's go ahead and do it. A J3 cup is probably going to have 3" in between every spacing. Okay, everybody follow? So we'll say that we took this panel and it's ready to rib stitch or rib lace. So the way you do it is you would take markings. This is let's say this is a cup panel here. We're going to do every 3 inches, we'll make a mark. Okay? We would take the same exact measurements and do that to the bottom side of your panel. Once you have it laid out, then you take and this is a curved tip needle, but we do have straight tip needles, and if you learn how to rib lace, you'll know why we have 2 different. Anyway, you take a needle and you pre-poke the holes as tight as you can to that rib. Okay? Pre-poke the holes on both sides. The lacing goes through and out the bottom and around the rib and back up. So one lace will actually sandwich both layers of fabric onto the ribs. I want to show you just a little demo. I don't know if we'll be able to bust it because he glued it not too long ago, but if he and I just pull on it, it shows you how strong that glue is. Now when peel, it'll peel right off. See that? So that's why you don't trust the glue 100% to be the mechanical attachment onto fabric. Here's the steps. You're still not done with poly brush. You're gonna do one pre-coat in between the lines. Then you will let that completely dry. Okay? One pre-coat, let it dry. Now you come back and do a second nice wet coat. Apply the tape into that second wet coat. And you can immediately do the 3rd coat over the top of the tape. And that's how you would install a finishing tape. Now we're going to move over to another product called Poly Spray. Poly Spray is just another vinyl-based coating with aluminum paste in it. It's almost essentially same resins, pretty close to poly brush, but they put aluminum paste into it for the UV protection. Okay? If you take a bare piece of fabric, let it sit outside in the weather, within a year and a half, it'll actually fall apart, it'll deteriorate. So the UV protection is really critical. This is done in 2 different sessions, and I'll explain what I mean by that. You're gonna show up the day after you're done with the poly brush, right? And you're gonna do 2 cross coats, 2 hours in between cross coats. What's a cross coat? I'm gonna have my spray gun, I'm gonna shoot north, south, immediately do east, west. That's one cross coat. 2 hours later, I come back and do the second cross coat. At that point, all the imperfections are gonna come out. Little trash that is visible is just gonna pop out like a sore thumb. You might think that it looks pretty bad, but don't worry. You're done for that day when you do the second cross coat. You come back the next day. Now we're gonna do some wet sanding. That's when you can target all those imperfections. We're gonna sand with 320 grit sandpaper and water, right? Sand all the silver, get it back to super smooth surface. Clean off the surface, let it dry. You can use, to clean the surface, we have a product called 2210 paint cleaning solvent. You just damp a rag and wipe the surface, let it completely dry, and do a third and final cross coat of silver. So when you sand it off, you're essentially putting back on. Right? So done in 2 steps. Once again, one day is 2 cross coats, 2 hours in between coats. Show up the next day, you wet sand, final cross coat, you're done. It's time to start thinking about paint. We have a vinyl-based paint called Polytone, and that's what you're looking at here. Polytone is a semi-gloss. A lot of the antiquers like it because it was a shiny paint back then. Semi-gloss, good paint. It was really designed for fabric. It'll work on metal and fiberglass, but it's not the greatest for all that. Okay. One of the best things about Polytone is repairability is super simple. If you poke the hole here, I can take a rag with NEK, remove the top coat, remove the silver, go all the way back to bare fabric, slap a patch on, build the coats back on, and you're flying again. So it's super simple.